Good afternoon. Welcome to the February 21st meeting of the State Board. We will start. First, let me double check. I know we have a lot of people on Zoom participating today. Thank you for joining us. We have Board Member Adrian Woods. Adrian, can you hear everything? Great. And we have other board members here in person in Little Rock. We will start first with the consideration of emergency rules governing the adult diploma program with Ross White.
Good afternoon. Ross White, Director for the Division of Career and Technical Education. So the rules in front of you today are for the adult diploma program. So this was legislation passed in the 23 session, Act 546. So these rules are to get us started with that. Obviously there's two sets I think in front of you when you look at your agenda, the emergency clause piece and then obviously the promulgation piece. So to give you just a little bit of background where this is and kind of where we're going with the legislation. So the purpose of this program is to provide truly an adult diploma option, which means it's for people that are over the age of 21. So that's the first piece. So they're over the age of 21 and they don't have a high school diploma. And so the intent, if you look at the legislation and kind of the rules we have in place, are to be able to give adults that opportunity to complete a high school diploma. In addition to that, it also has a focus towards career skills and giving them a skill set to have different certifications or credential opportunities while also obtaining that high school diploma. This is obviously in addition to like a GED option. Part of the reasoning when you look in this is because the GED is not always attainable by a lot of people, and so this gives that additional opportunity there. So through an RFQ process, we obviously have 4 vendors that went through that and were approved that can provide these services. These services can be done face-to-face, they can be done virtually or through a blended opportunity as it was spelled out in the legislation. The funding for this is actually through the Department of Commerce and the Office of Skills Development. They have the appropriation for $750,000 a year, but we get to promulgate the rules and oversee the programming because it's obviously dealing with a high school diploma piece. So we do a lot of things already in partnership with the Department of Commerce and Office of Skills Development, but this is that connection there through that. And then in the legislation, a lot of the accountability was spelled out. So when you're looking at these rules, a lot of these come straight from the legislation that was put in place there. And so the goal here is to be able to help more Arkansans that obviously didn't achieve a high school diploma in a traditional route be able to do that through other means that we can provide, because we know the GED is not always the best option. So that's it in a nutshell. I will gladly take questions or concerns you have on where we're at. Obviously the emergency clause is there in one set of rules, and then the second set of rules is the same thing minus the emergency clause for that promulgation process.
How long do the emergency rules
I didn't want my background video.
I think we have someone not muted on Zoom. If everyone would mind to double check and make sure you're muted at this point. Thank you.
Do you want to repeat that? I'm not sure we got it.
How long are the emergency rules in effect?
So once they're approved by the executive subcommittee of the Legislative Council, so the legislature, they're in effect for 120 days. Yes, ma'am.
Questions of board members? Yeah, go on.
Can I ask a few more? I noticed they had the regional accreditation. I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, so I know there in the definitions there are, and that was straight from the legislation. So the definition is from the legislation that was passed. They defined what accreditation meant and what all the different accredited entities could be.
And then 4.05.1 and 4.05.2 is really confusing to me.
So
Is it to you?
well, it's an interesting piece of it. So there is this pot of money annually, and it is a first come, first served basis. And so really the way it works is, we went through that RFQ process. We have 4 approved vendors. In that process, the first to request, the first in is the first to be paid, and we will pay out until that amount is exhausted. And so it is a first come, first served basis in regards to that. And that's kind of spelling out that process of what that would look like, if that makes sense. Anything?
Yeah, and if I can add, if you look at the end of the rule, there's an appendix which shows, it's Appendix A, and it has sums that will be paid out whenever students complete a particular, like either certification, a credential, get a high school diploma, or graduate and are placed in a job in an in-demand career. So again, as people are completing these things, these vendors are getting paid on a first-come, first-served basis.
Because one part of it says they won't provide for a new student, but then on 4.05.2, it looks like it's funding for enrolled students. So you're saying once they complete a certain section of it, that could be the end of their funding?
Well, what that's specifically addressing is once we know that funds are exhausted, we have to let the providers know there's no more money in the pot effectively. And so at that point, we would no longer be able to receive reimbursements from providers, which is 5.2, and then 5.3 goes into funds that are reserved. And so there can be funds reserved before you hit the end total.
I guess my question is will the student be able to complete their diploma, or can it be stopped when the funding is stopped in the midstream? Does that make sense?
Well, the reimbursement to the provider would occur after they've completed
Okay.
that milestone. That was in Appendix A. Yes, ma'am.
More questions, board members? Lisa?
Okay, how does somebody access this program? Do they go through commerce or education?
That's a good question. So again, it's designed through that adult diploma piece. So Commerce is in piece of there working through the Division of Workforce Services that falls under that to be able to provide that information in our workforce centers for those that are looking to obtain their high school diploma and maybe the GE route is not working for them. That is the most common word of mouth of how that system will go out with the ones that are working through workforce services, because they're typically the parties that, the stakeholders at play that would need it to be able to share that information.
Thank you.
I'd say, Ross, I don't know if maybe you can clarify, but there are adult high school diplomas in existence in the
Yep.
state. So this isn't a new opportunity for people seeking a pathway back to prosperity. A lot of it's done through philanthropic efforts. This is the first time, which is great about this innovative program, is that there's an estate appropriation to support the entities. There's probably a handful of entities, you would know better than me, that are providing these services. They're not getting any funding to provide these services. They're relying on philanthropic donations, maybe small tuition rates. So this is an opportunity to help sustain those programs so that they can attract more students, push our attainment rate. When we look at where we rank in attainment nationally, there's some annual reports put out by the Lumina Foundation that get collected from the Census Bureau, and it really measures the adults in a state or a community or a county that have at least a high school diploma, age 25, I want to say to 62 or 64. Arkansas is in the bottom 10 when we rank states 1 through 50 in attainment rates. So this is something I think that's going to help improve that metric by targeting adults in our communities that want to pursue their education and earn that standard credential, but then also supplement the providers that have already existing in this space by allowing them to be reimbursed for services provided with a finite amount of that appropriation. So since this is the first year we have an appropriation, it's almost kind of like a test year coming up to see how well it's going, how much dollars are drawn down. Do we need to go back to the legislature, ask for more funding? Is it not enough funding? Where do we go? So I like to applaud the legislature and the folks that work on this to they identified a gap and a need, and to really support these providers that need that support. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
And we're fortunate that all 4 of the providers we're working with have already done very similar pieces in other states, and so they're ready to go because they've already know part of that implementation process, what it looks like, how to attract the population they're trying to serve, and so they're very eager and ready to go, and so we're trying to get those rules to them so we can start giving those dollars.
May I ask, just to clarify, so previously was it the adult education, were they charter schools? Or how did we previously approve the providers that were giving?
So, so we have the adult ed that still exists within the Department of Commerce. This is just an
Right.
additional piece, so.
But don't we have like Goodwill? Don't they have a school where they
I
can
mean,
give
so
out
there's the Excel Center with Goodwill.
Excel
that took-
Center? So what, previously, before this law, what were they? What type of entity were they? Did we have rules over that? Is this replacing that, or this is?
I can't speak.
This
on that.
goes back to, there was entities in a philanthropic space providing
Right,
these
they didn't get any
services.
state money,
They didn't get
right.
any state money. This would give them a chance to be reimbursed for some of the, for the services that they're providing.
But at one point in time, didn't the law have to change because under 21, you, like after 21, you couldn't get a high school degree? Am I right in that or wrong? I don't know. Now, you, I mean, you,
That's
you
good.
could have a 42-year-old and they don't, GED is not their only path. Now they can go back and get a full high
Based
school
off of this
diploma
one.
recognized the same way
Yes,
as
ma'am.
someone that graduated high school.
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
That's great. I would love at some point, maybe down the road, sort of an update on what this is looking like and
And there is
how
a
it's
good
going.
accountability piece in there that they have to report back to the department, their metrics, to ensure that we're being able to hit what is being reimbursed in that process. So we should be able to, a year from now, be able to give some pretty good information from it, hopefully see some return.
Thank you. Board members, more questions?
So just real quick, what is, I mean, seems like several pathways or, here in the appendix or different things that you can be reimbursed for. What is the amount of time that a student would have to put in usually to?
Well, and that's a unique part to this, is every one of them is coming in kind of at a different place. And so there is no set metric, and we've had a lot of conversation as we've drafted these rules and then with the providers. And what we've seen in other states that have been modeled is every student is completely different, because some are gonna come in with a little bit more movement towards that high school diploma based off their transcript. Some are gonna come with no transcript, and they're gonna start from point A and have to work the whole process through. So there's not really a good timeline. That's also why when you look in the rules, it talks a lot about those cohorts, because that forms those cohorts each year of the group. And some students will finish a cohort the first year and be done and have their diploma, and some might be in the year 1 cohort, the year 2 cohort, the year 3 cohort, just based off of how much that is needed for them to achieve it.
Gotcha, thank you.
Awesome. Board members, any more questions? Ms. Woods? Thank you. Okay, so the floor will be open for a motion. We will have two different motions. One will be for the emergency rules, and the second will be for the release to public comment.
That's correct, yeah.
The floor is open for a motion first to approve or not approve the emergency rules governing the adult diploma program.
I move we approve the rules. Emergency rule.
A motion to approve by Mr. Bragg. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Henderson. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. So next on the floor will be to release these for public comment.
That's correct.
Any questions on that, board members? Ms. Woods, any questions?
No, but I did want to also point out that Ms. Keener is online. I didn't know if you knew that.
I did not. There we go.
But I have no questions, so no thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for joining. I'm glad I see you now. Glad to have a whole lot of people on Zoom today. So glad that you pointed that out. Thank you.
I'll make the motion that we open these rules up for public comment.
There's a motion by Ms. Rollins. Is there a second?
Second?
A second by Ms. Hunter. All in favor say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, board.
Thank you. Next on our agenda are district waiver requests for their alternative school calendar, and that will be for this current school year.
Good afternoon, Stacy Smith. I'm going to try to explain this so that we all understand what's going on here. Okay, so this school year, we've had several of our districts that have had several missed school days due to inclement weather. And our legislation allows for different types of calendars. One is the traditional calendar that is 178 days. Another option is a calendar called an alternate calendar that is by hours, and it's 1,068 hours. You get the 1,068 hours by multiplying 178 times 6 hours a day equals the 1,068 hours of instruction. So districts have a choice to have a traditional 178 day or the alternate calendar. But they have to notify the department in legislation by July 1. And they notify us through a cycle report. They select it. That is not something that they have to have board approval for. It's part of their calendar adoption process at a local level. So this year, as school districts have faced numerous days of inclement weather, those school districts that stayed with the 178 traditional calendar, they are limited in how they can make up those time or days. All right, there is legislation that allows them to extend their school day, but they have to do it in increments of 1 hour, not by 30 minutes or not by adding their time up. They can only do it in blocks of an hour. Districts that have an alternate calendar by hour have much more flexibility. Okay, they can count, if they were going 6 hours and 10 minutes for instruction a day, they can count those 10 minutes all the way through till the end of the year. And that's about instructional time. That's not about lunch. It's not about transitional time. It's about class time. So what we're presenting to you today is a waiver request for districts they're wanting to notify the department that they would like to move from the traditional 178 to the alternate calendar, which allows them more flexibility in how to make up their days. Most of these districts are already, and especially if they were missing 4 or 5 days, they've already altered their calendars. For example, some that had planned to be out on President's Day attended school on President's Day. Some of them, hoping to change to an alternate calendar, have looked at extending their school day by 30 minutes from now to the end of the year so that they're making up those days. Again, a lot of it was trying to front load instruction prior to assessments and testing versus adding it on at the end of the year. You do have some school districts in the state, even with adding some time on, even with doing some calendars, they're still going to be making up 2 or 3 days afterwards, dependent upon how much weather they've had and where they're located in the state. So the waiver request today is actually, they're waiving that they had to notify the department by July 1. That's all they're doing. They're asking, can they notify us later that they are going to switch over to the alternate calendar? Myself, legal, Dr. Saunders, various people at the department have met with various superintendents, done various Zooms on what does this look like to make the most of your time and make sure that you're making instruction count, okay? For every district out there doing the right thing, I've heard of 1 or 2 who I think, what are they doing? That doesn't even make sense, right? But usually when we follow up and we talk to them, there's a thought process. They have an explanation. So today's waiver, though, is about the date of notification to us, okay? So I'm asking actually for 2 motions today. One motion, you should have received this copy here. At the top, it says inclement weather waivers. And it shows 29 schools. I'll give you a second to find that. Did y'all have that?
I did not see
Mary, did you pass this out to everybody? Okay, can I get that, please? Share it with you. So at the top, you see 29 schools. 29 schools have already taken this to their local board for approval. And again, it's asking to waive Arkansas Code annotated 610-106G3, which it pertains to the notification of July 1, so the date to notify the department. So these 29 schools have already had their local board approval to do this. So pending your approval of this waiver of the date, these 29 schools would be allowed to switch from traditional to alternate. Did you want to say something? Okay.
One quickly, could we email this to the 2 board members
Yes.
online? Do you mind?
Mary, could you email that to them?
Do we we want to stop here and do questions of
Mhm.
you, the way I look at it, we'll do questions of the department first, and then if there are specific districts that board members have questions on, we can pull those out. So let's start with questions of the agency first. Mr. Brown?
Is it up to the individual school to determine where the 10 minutes goes as far as which class or?
Yes, so the school district would determine their instructional time throughout the day. And so you have your individual schools who are determining that, and they're working with their district leadership. So you'll have a school district who they might have 6 hours and 30 minutes at an elementary, 6 hours and 15 minutes at the middle school, and 6 hours on the dot at the high school. The minimum requirement, though, for every student is that 1,068.
But it could vary from class to class, whether it's a math class or,
Yes, sir.
I mean, it could change week to week or?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
For example, when I taught middle school math, we double blocked literacy. So kids came to my class for English for 2 periods, but they went to social studies for 1 period. We don't have set amount of instructional time by subject matter. We just have the time for the day.
Board members' questions, Ms. Rollins?
Oh. So whenever we approve this, I mean, do they get to go back and like say they had 6
Yes,
hours, 10
ma'am.
minutes, so it's
Yes, they
cumulative
get to go back.
entire school
Yeah, so if you're at the beginning, if you've been going 6 hours and 30 minutes all year, in essence, you could almost say you've banked some time, right? And that's where some of the pieces of flexibility come in, where they're allowed to go back and say, okay, we've had this instructional time that we've devoted because we've had a longer school day all along.
Right, thank you.
And it gives them some flexibility. And districts that have already declared an alternate calendar, they're not on this list today. They're already doing this. It was a new thing, though. Most districts were, they stayed with what they had.
So, like, on this first group, these 29 schools, 14 are missing resolutions, and they've only submitted.
So that's paperwork piece.
Okay.
Okay, that's just purely paperwork. We're reaching back out to them and saying, yes, you've documented that you had a school board meeting and that they approved it, but we're asking for on file paperwork that we have your resolution.
Okay.
The bottom group have, it's scheduled. They have a board meeting that might be next week. It might be tonight, right? So they have submitted to us evidence that they're taking it to their board. We were trying to be efficient with a special board meeting. So the bottom group, when I ask for a motion on that, it will be pending their local board approval. So if their board doesn't approve it, and you do, it would be moot.
Thank you.
Mr. Wood, questions?
I don't think so.
Ms. Rollins? Mr. Henderson? Mr. Brown? Ms. Long? Ms. Keener? Ms. Woods, questions?
I do want to note this, and Secretary Leave, I can see him gearing up too. And I'm going to take the first swing and then let him home run it. How's that? This is about minimum amounts. That is not the bar. Standards and legislation pieces sometimes are about this is what you're required to do. And we don't want people saying, oh, we've got to a 1,068, we're done, we don't have to do any more days of school. Okay, it's still about wise instructional opportunities. There is more flexibility in hours, but we still are encouraging districts, think about how you stretch that out during the year. When does it make sense to maybe have a shorter day? You know, is it right before parent-teacher conferences and you're giving your teachers 2 hours in a day to work on preparing for a parent-teacher conference, right? Like, how can you be flexible throughout the year in terms of your student time, but making sure that when you have student instructional time, it's high quality, right? We could have 2,000 minimum hours in here, but if it's poor instructional quality, it wouldn't matter, right? So it's about quality. How do you ensure quality? But these are minimum standards.
I was just gonna kind of say the same thing and echo the sentiments. It's a minimum of 178 days of school and 1,068 hours, not a maximum. Most of our schools' calendars that they adopt at 178 days, their student hours are around 7 hours a day of instruction because their student day is 7.5. Some schools go even 8 hours a day. So they'll exceed those minimum expectations. School districts are required to adopt a calendar that includes makeup days. That should be the first place we go when we lose an instructional day is let's look at the calendar that our board approved and identified as makeup days, because we have to make up instruction. If there's anything that we learned from the pandemic, is distance learning and remote learning does not work for all students. In fact, we've got national data that says we could lose a generation if we don't mitigate these gaps. So for people that are advocating and trying to tell us that sending a packet home with a first grader and says that this equals a day of full instruction, that's ridiculous. I worry about our special needs students that have IEPs, individualized education plans, that say that they're going to get so many minutes of physical therapy and speech therapy. They're not going to get that remote. They're not going to get that at home. We have to make up lost instructional time. There is a place for alternative methods of instruction. That may be the last resort, not the first resort when we're looking at inclement weather. So we're going to work with districts. Adopting their calendar is a local decision, but we should be able to meet these minimum expectations. If a school district is struggling to meet those minimum expectations, then we're going to bring back to the board some alternative solutions, because there's some real incidences where distance learning may be the only viable option. There may be some incidences with inclement weather where buildings and facilities are destroyed and may take months to rebuild. So we've got to be creative in developing these services. But for typical operational day-to-day business, we need students in person in front of a high-quality instructor getting the high-quality lessons that they deserve. That's what these superintendents have gone back to the boards to do, to make sure that they can meet the minimum requirements. The majority of our superintendents that are on this call are still adopting calendars that exceed it, because they know how important it is to make up this lost instructional time.
When I looked at the research, Arkansas was below national average, was about 180 days. So we are already below the bar on what we're providing our students, and the missed opportunities is concerning to me. I want to dig in a little bit on the 6 hours of instruction. And I know we talked about this a little bit before the meeting. What is 6 hours of instruction? Is that defined in law differently at the elementary or the high school level?
So 6 hours of instruction time is specific to that. What is instruction in a classroom between a student and a teacher? Okay, the difference that you see though in elementary is there was legislation that does allow recess to count as instructional time at the elementary level. And that happened, I believe it was 3 years ago during a legislative session when increasing unstructured playtime for elementary kids, legislation was passed. And so that school districts now are required to have a certain amount of elementary recess for students, and that does get to count as instructional time. At the high school and at the elementary, you're not counting lunch times, you're not counting supervisory periods, you're not counting class in between class times. It's really about instruction, direct instruction in the classroom.
We have districts that often will do half days. And when we move to the hour session, they're only counting those hours. When we're on that 178 and they have a half day.
So standards for accreditation allows districts to have either 6 hours a day or an average of 30 hours for the week. Okay, so when they have opportunities in which they have a half day for within a week, it still averages out over the year where they're getting that 30 hours a week. Okay.
We have districts that, like you said, built in snow days into their calendar, and we're effectively saying, don't use those, you don't need to.
No.
Because you have the hours.
No.
We have some of, I mean, I've seen some of their calendars and they're not gonna use those snow days because we're giving them this waiver.
So all school districts are required to build in 5 additional days at the end of the school year for snow days. Okay, all districts are required to do that. Where this has become a bigger conversation this year is districts in the past few years have been allowed to use the altered AMI, okay, in which we're taking a stand at this point that that's not the best instructional methods. We want that in-person time. The alternate calendar allows them the flexibility to count instructional hours, time with kids, versus just tacking on days at the end of the year. So you do see some school districts who are trading professional development days, in which was a teacher work day, for students to come in and had already on their calendars identified that as a snow makeup day. Some didn't, and those that didn't, they're having to make a calendar change to their local boards and go in and say, can we do this? And work with their local PPC, their teachers, because it's a change of contract. So every district in this, in determining which days they're actually making up. There are multiple local decision pieces here.
Are we requiring districts to, fill in those holes first before coming to us to seek this waiver?
So no, okay, there's not a requirement here to
The requirement is just the minimum hours.
when they're switching over to the alternate, they're switching over with the flexibility to make up that time in different increments than what the 178 allows. The 178 only allows districts to make it up in an hour block before or at the end of the school day or at the end of the year. The alternate calendar gives you the flexibility to play with your school day and extend it 15, 20 minutes and be able to bank time. Go 30 minutes for 12 days and be able to say we've made up one day there. It gives them a little bit more flexibility.
Before AMI days, am I correct that if you didn't meet your days, you would add your snow days, but occasionally you would come to our board for a standards of accreditation waiver?
They would come for a waiver of their days. So when you had districts who were closed for 2 weeks because of snow or because they had, case of the flu. I mean, they're like all their different, that had bats in their attic. I mean, I remember different things. They would come and ask literally for a waiver not to have to make those days up, and the board could grant that. And that's still an option for districts.
What's the difference in doing it this way versus that way?
A district that would come and ask for you, they would just be asking you to completely waive it, and that they wouldn't have to be made to make it up at all.
Okay.
The alternate calendar is, we're still saying there is a minimum of set of instructional hours we're expecting you to have, and that's what these districts are doing.
How are we going to mitigate this so this isn't a waiver that's being requested every year?
I do think the conversation as we're moving into a legislative session next year, I think this is going to be a hot topic. I think calendars in general are going to be a hot topic.
And in that, I mean, it sounds like from you all, you are going to stress we want in-person, high-quality instruction for as many days as you can.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something that when we've done Zooms with the districts, I mean, I want to say that I've heard from many, many superintendents around the state who are saying they don't want the message to be sent that this is all you got to do. You know, that this should be about high-quality instruction all year long. And they're pushing back on their districts or their local districts that are cutting days or cutting time or maybe not keeping it at that level of this is about quality. And so I do think you're seeing some superintendents right now really rise up to say this is what we're about and this is what we're doing. Bruce Orr in Lakeside has most definitely said, you know, we're making days up at the end of the year because we told our community we'd be open 178 days and we're going to make these days at the end of the year mean something. And they're thinking about it in a different way. I think it'll be a place to watch to see what they're doing. I heard from Cross County the other day who said we're making days up, but we're making it up in a different way, and we want to make sure that the quality is there. So we have superintendents and we have school districts and we have local boards who are asking these same questions.
And to add to that is districts have this flexibility already. To Stacy's point is all they're doing is asking for the time of when they notify us that they're wanting to use this flexibility. We're not giving them the flexibility to use the flexibility they already have in statute.
Yeah.
So I think when we talk about are some of these options the best options, whether it's calendar start date, time of instruction, I struggle with schools that go 4 days a week and they're failing. But they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to make that as a local decision. We have students that are not getting systematic, explicit instruction that the research tells us they need 5 days a week, if not more, and they're allowed to go 4 days a week. So when we have a bigger conversation around instructional days and making every minute count, I think it was Muhammad Ali that says, don't count down the days, make every day count, or something along those lines. That's what this means. We should expect grade level instruction in every classroom, bell to bell, each and every single day. That's what our students deserve. That's what our school districts are striving to aim for, and that's what we're going to continue to strive for.
Good point.
I have one more thought. When the schools are using professional development days to instruct students, what happens to those professional days? I mean, that's in
So again,
statute as well.
the contract between the district and the teacher, they would make that day, generally they would select that professional development day, they would put it on at the end of the year. Or they might come up with an alternative professional development agreement with their teachers for, we're going to stay after school for 6 days for an hour and do professional development over the next so many weeks. So they have some flexibility in the contract days with their teachers to make that up.
I just didn't want us to lose those professional development hours.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I'm taking too many questions. I know we talked about, are there any districts that have a waiver from 30-hour instructional weeks?
So we looked at that we actually have several that have that waiver, and we were having a very difficult time pulling those for you in terms of how it applies to like meeting. A lot of them were digital learning.
Okay.
So what I can tell you though with this specific waiver, so if you have a district right now who had come to this board and asked for a waiver to get out early on Wednesdays at 1 o'clock, because they were doing professional learning communities or something like that, if they're switching over to an alternate calendar, they have to have 1,068 hours, period. However they count it, they got to meet the minimum hours.
And we
They
know a lot
don't,
of districts that they do that Wednesday off, they're adding on the other days, but I recall districts that have come to us to get
Yes.
that
yes.
waiver from the 30.
And
I don't
this
think
would
we
not
should do
allow,
that.
this would make sure that they have to have the total number met. And we do have folks in accountability who pull school schedules and who monitor that.
So just so that I understand, Stacy, so whereas some districts could basically have banked hours like you talked about a few minutes ago, there are certain districts that also now could have to make up extra hours?
Yes,
Do I
ma'am.
understand?
Yes. So you have some districts who, they were right at 6 hours a day, and because they missed days, they're going to be short. So those districts are lengthening their school day so that they are making up time before the very end of the school year. And many of those districts who are that short, they're still going to be probably making up some days, depending on how many they missed. But they may not have to miss, if they missed a total of 6 or 7 days, they may only have to make up a full 3 days versus, because they can bank some of that time, gain some of that time back.
All 4-day school week districts, were they already on the calendar with minutes?
Their rules allow them to have a 7.5-hour instructional day, and so they're meeting it according to the 4-day rules versus alternate or 178 days. It's a whole nother configuration.
So a lot of the 4-day-a-week schools, the superintendents we talked to, they're gonna go that 5th day to hit that 1,068 hours.
That's how
So
they're
they
going to
still-
make
but
it
That's
up.
how they're
that
gonna do it. They would
minimum
still
Yes.
have to meet the
1,068
minimum.
hours.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, they still have that day to make up.
Very easy for them to make up those hours by having
should
school
be.
on a Monday.
Mhm.
Do we want to, board members have specific questions of school districts?
I have one that I wanna add that has submitted their paperwork, but it's not on the list, so I would like the board to consider including El Dorado on the list. I wanna make sure I said that right, cause I wanna get invited back. El Dorado, cause I said it wrong once and I promise I would never say it wrong again.
So that would be it for these 30.
So they go in the second
Top
group?
group.
Top group.
First group, because they have turned in
So
everything.
We apologize for that. I just wanna make sure they're included.
And I will say that, so legal has taken each school's application and reviewed each component.
Correct. All 100 and
Well, now you're at 30 plus
30,
89.
Just to be clear, if districts are looking to switch to that hour method for next school year, they don't get that approved by this board.
No, they do not get it that approved. But what they would do in their cycle report before July 1 is they would notify us, and that's in cycle 7.
Okay, 'cause in
And I can tell you, this school year, before any of this, there's schools that are doing that.
Mhm.
That go 175 days a year and are hitting the 1,068
Mhm.
hours. They have that authority. But
I-
they still have to meet the minimum hour requirements, so if they miss so much school and they're already down days, they're gonna have to make up additional time.
And what we've really encouraged them is use that full 178. Use more. Again,
Right.
this is minimum, right?
Yeah, I would love some conversations later on about why was that minimum set there, and or do we need to up it as we're
Why
recommending
was
the
the
legislature?
178
Yeah,
set? Yeah.
and and have that conversation as we
Mhm.
gear up towards the 25 session.
I have a question with regard to the list of 29 or 89. Are any of these districts 4-day-a-week districts?
do that.
And Stephen, if you can come up just to be sure, can you bring up the spreadsheet? Let me just pull up my school info. I don't think so, but we can double check. Four-day school department, school districts. Yep, correct. On this initial group of 30. What does one say? Let me pull it up.
We had Jeff earlier with no questions.
While they're looking, I'll just briefly explain. I do think that the 4 days of instruction per week is a very important issue. And if any of them are on the Zoom or requesting this waiver, I would love to hear from them how they intend to use the waiver to make up their time with that extra day a week that students aren't in the building. But I also understand that it's really not that many districts that do it, so it's not surprising that they might not be on there.
They would already be meeting the hours.
Yeah, because they had that 7.5. I don't
Right, so they wouldn't be needing to alternate their calendar as they're verifying, to my recollection, because they're already on that alternative calendar. But
I see.
but I
So-
wanna-
So they're already on an alternative calendar, so they would not have to ask for a
for
waiver.
a waiver, they're
I
just
see.
gonna locally update their calendar
see.
with their local board.
So they have the flexibility then to just go make a local decision
That's correct.
as soon as they wanna have a school board meeting to change their
School calendar.
school day.
Mhm.
I see, okay, so they wouldn't be on here at all.
Monday or that Friday, whichever day
Yeah. Well, thank you for that clarification on that. It makes sense that they probably would not be on here.
Okay, are you good?
I am good, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your time, though. I
We'll
appreciate
get that for sure.
Well, it makes sense that the question kind of answers itself, so. One last comment I'll have is that I hope that districts will use this waiver to, the flexibility that they gain to really have high-quality instructional time, not just tacking on 15 minutes at the end of the day and checking a box. We got our hours, guys. Let's go home. In the end, it will still be reflected in, annual assessments, and this will be one less excuse that school leaders have. And so I hope that they will make every effort to make this flexibility high quality.
And you all did say you pushed the assessment window back a week too.
Yes, we added, we didn't push it back, we extended it another week. So it opens at the same time, but we've extended it another week for those districts who are just adding on at the end of the year.
Board members, any questions? Ms. Keener, Ms. Woods online, any questions? Any questions of specific school districts? Okay.
So at this time, I'll be asking the board to make a motion.
So we may need to amend it.
I apologize. Board needs to vote to add El Dorado before
So we need to make
you
sure
would
that's
vote on them as a total, if you can do that, please.
Okay. And are we gonna, well, you were gonna say, are we gonna have two votes?
Yeah, so if you'll add El Dorado first, then I'll tell you the motion.
Okay, so our first vote will be to add El Dorado to the list of inclement weather waivers that have already previously sought their local board approval. So moved. Motion by Ms. Hunter, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Woods, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
passes.
Could I ask about this email that we were given with regard to BB?
I don't know anything about an email with BB.
Oh,
You
it seems to be BB asking to be included as well, and I didn't see them on either list. But it could be, I'm sorry.
Theirs is for the calendar
Yeah,
start date.
I
I
apologize.
think they're on the other list.
It's
Yeah.
calendar start date. Calendar start date. Calendar start date?
I think so.
Okay, that's twice
I'm
now.
gonna see if I can find any more irrelevant questions to ask.
Well, but to answer that question, they had submitted the paperwork. They had a board meeting last night, and they submitted that information to us this morning based on the meeting from last night.
Very good.
That's still not calendar start date.
Yes.
100%.
So now we have two lists here, one with 30 schools now, including El Dorado, and one with 89 schools.
Correct. Okay, we ready? So I'll be asking for the board for a motion to waive Arkansas Code annotated 610-106 G3 as it pertains to the July 1 deadline to notify the department for the 30 school listed that already have board approval.
Any questions on that, board members? Okay, floor is open for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the 30 schools.
There's a motion by Ms. Rollins. Is there a second?
Section.
A second by Mr. Henderson.
But is that not be that whole? Is that the
All in
whole-
favor, say aye.
Aye.
It
Any
does, but
opposed?
it's because we explain it.
Motion passes.
Okay.
This is the part they're doing.
Well, I understand. There's two separate requirements.
Brief pause, 1 second. So now we're looking at
This
the
was
89.
only just this requirement.
Okay, so do you want me to read all of this? Is that what you're saying to me?
Well, we already did this, so all we need to do is this next.
Okay, go ahead and say what you think you said.
All right. So we just relieved districts from having to comply with the July 1st deadline to let the department know that they wanted to move into an alternate calendar. In that same section, there's a deadline of August 1st for school districts to post their alternate calendar on the district website. So this next vote would be to, under waive Arkansas Code annotated 610-106 G3 as it pertains to the August 1st deadline to post the alternate school calendar on the school district website, and any requirement and any deadline as to the requirements to input into eSchool, eFinance, or AppScan all relevant data in that time period of July and August, so that they can file that paperwork now.
Okay, so this is a motion, this would be a motion, and this is still on these 30 right now.
This is still in the same 30, yes,
Okay.
correct.
Any questions on that, board members? Board members online, any questions? Okay. The floor is open for a motion on that, again, for these first 30 school districts.
I'll make the motion.
A motion by Ms. Rollins,
Second.
a second by Ms. Hunter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So on this next one, I'm going to put both of them together. We're going to get good here. All right. I'm asking the board for a motion to waive Arkansas Code annotated 610-106 G3 as it pertains to the July 1 deadline to notify the department of the school district and to implement a school calendar. The August 1st deadline to post the alternate school calendar on the school district website, and the requirement to input into eSchool, eFinance, or AppScan all relevant data in July and August, and instead allow the school district to meet those requirements outside the July and August deadlines. So that would be for the 89 school districts pending their local board approval.
May I ask a question on that? If their local board says we don't like this plan,
Then it doesn't,
then they have to do what?
they have to
Stick
stay with their calendar that they
178,
have.
And they would then fill in those snow days that they have
Correct.
pre-approved.
Mhm. They would not be, yeah, their calendar would stay the same.
Okay. Any questions on that, board members? No? So, board members online, any questions? Okay, so the floor is open for a motion, and this is on the 89 school districts pending approval by their local board. Floor is open for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Ms. Hunter, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Henderson. All in favor say aye.
Uh,
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Next.
Thank you.
There we go. item 3, district waiver request for the 2024-25 school start date.
Yes, good afternoon, Courtney Salas Ford for the department. So we don't have a similar list for you, I apologize for that. But these are school districts that are asking for a waiver of the prescribed school start date in law, which many of you know is kind of a range. So it either has to be on August 19th or the Monday of the week in which the 19th falls. Many of these districts have asked to start on August 12th, which would be 1 week earlier. There are a few school districts that had other dates within August before the 19th that they also wanted to start on. There are 10 schools that still would need their local board approval to do this, so your motion would be similar to what it was for the others, that it's approved pending local board approval. And then there are 133 schools whose local board has already approved it, and so again, they are seeking the waiver of 615-103. No, I'm sorry. It's a motion to waive Arkansas Code 6-10-106. Reading my wrong notes.
Okay, questions of board members? To my right, Ms. Rollins, Ms. Hunter, Mr. Wood.
Do we have authority to grant a blanket change of the start date for all districts, regardless of whether they ask for it?
No, we do not. So the statute that gives us the authority, gives you all as the board the authority to waive the start date is 615-103. And so it has to be upon request of a school district. And that again is based on a charter school having a waiver of that same section. And so only the districts that asked for a waiver are the ones that you can grant it for.
Board members, questions? Mr. Bragg?
Are they wanting an earlier start date so they can get out earlier, or is there a reason?
No, because even if they start earlier than August 19th, they still have to meet either that 178-day or 1,068-hour requirement. So many school districts are trying to attempt to shorten that long summer break, which we know can sometimes lead to, loss of retention. Others build different days in throughout their school year so that they might go more than 178 or more than that 1,068 hours, so that they, what we've seen this year, have already had that extra time before we get into inclement weather season, and it might prevent them from making it up at the end of the school year. So there can be a variety of different reasons, but no, it doesn't minimize their requirement for the 178.
I think one of the biggest challenges, especially for high schools with a later date that want their first term to end at holiday break, you need about that 90 days or so built in the first half of the school year in order to do that. It's really difficult for students to come back from holiday break to do final exams to start second semester. And when you're pushed up against the time, there is no time in case of school closures or inclement weather. So this would give those districts the ability to build a calendar to satisfy getting that first term and at the natural holiday break, which I think is really important to districts.
Board members online, do you have questions?
I just wanted to make sure, so we're approving these for the next 5 years, or for the term that they have asked for?
Districts have requested different amounts of time. That is up to you all as the board, whether you want to move to grant those for what was requested, or you can specify a shorter amount of time, such as 1 year, 2 year, 3 years.
So if we wanted to be able, I mean, it honestly sounds like a legislature issue to just go back and say we need to revise the statute, but I just wanted to make sure I understood.
And I mean, Mr. Bragg, you can speak to this more, but I think it has been changed in statute every 2 years, every legislative session we've had for the past 10 years.
Yeah, it comes up every session.
Yeah, and so it's a hot button issue, and at some point in time, our board didn't have the authority to waive. Now we do have the authority to waive the start date. But I do have concern about creating a long time waiver in which we do have a session coming up. Well, you know, it is their law that they're setting, that I don't want to get in front of that.
Right, and if you did grant it for more than 1 year and then there was a change to 610-106 in the 25 session, that change would effectively null any waivers that lasted beyond that time period. But if you wanted to be clear, you could make a motion that they were only approved for 1 year, which would be for the 24-25 school year. And then any legislative changes made in 25 session, they would have to follow those, of course, when they're planning for the 25-26 school year.
Board members, any more questions on that? Do we have any questions of specific school districts? I know. Again, thank you all for being on Zoom for our meeting today. Okay, and then did we want to ask about the email with BB? Does that need to be added to the list, or is that on our board list?
My list has on it BB School District as having submitted the application and resolution for the school start date waiver.
Okay, and they are on our agenda.
Yes.
I've seen a number of districts in the eastern part of the state move to the alternative calendar, where they're starting, end of July. That's not a decision, that decision never comes to our board, that's a local board decision.
Right,
correct?
that's not an alternate calendar, that's a school, year-round school calendar. So as you know, we have many different ones that exist in statute, the 4-day school week, the year-round calendar. Some of those require them to come to you for approval, some do not. So for these school districts to start before August 19th in 24, they would need your approval.
Okay, but none of these are doing that year-round calendar. They'll be on a traditional calendar, whether 178 days or minutes, they're just starting a week.
Correct. A week or more earlier.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments, board members?
I suppose I'll make a comment that I probably shouldn't, but I appreciate that this is, it sounds as though will be an effort to amend the laws regarding this in the next session, but what Mr. Bragg just suggested diminishes my hope that they'll do the right thing because they consider it every 2 years and we are still dealing with this. As a parent of school-age children and as a former school board member, I know that the current restrictions on the local districts to set their calendar are extremely frustrating. Kids don't learn in June, and they probably don't even learn after the annual assessment. And they don't want to play outside on August 5th. It is hot as Hades. So the idea that kids can't be in school earlier in August and out in May when they're cleaning classrooms and taking down bulletin boards, I hope that there will be some real consideration given to major changes to give districts the flexibility to teach kids when they're available to be taught and engaged in learning. But I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, I don't know.
It does, and I think this year is harder because the August 19th is a Monday, because the law does say the week of August 19th. So if August 19th was a Friday, you could therefore start the 14th. But again, I mean, the legislature working out this issue so that it is not a hot button, because I know PPCs want to meet, they want to have this set in stone before now.
Yeah.
And having to go through us or however every year is cumbersome. So I would hope that conversation can be had too.
I do like the idea for consistency, not because I don't support giving these districts as many years of waiver from this as we can, but so that if we were to limit it to 1 year, it would give the legislature an opportunity to speak on this issue, and then everybody come back after an effort has been made to revise this, to reduce confusion out and about. I think that there's some wisdom in maybe reducing these to 1 year grants.
Sounds like a motion.
Questions, comments? Floor open for motion.
I'll move to grant the calendar waiver, the school year start date waiver request. Would that be, how should I say this? I don't have.
That's fine. Again, I apologize. Yes, if it would be a motion to waive Arkansas Code Section 610-106A, the school start date.
Okay.
for 1 year, if that's what you were wanting to make
right.
that motion
Then
for.
I'll make a motion to waive Arkansas Code Annotated 6/10/106A, the school start date,
Mhm.
for 1 year for these districts that have submitted the request.
A motion by Mr. Wood, is there a second?
Second.
A second by Ms. Hunter. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
And if I could ask for a second motion with identical wording, except adding pending local board approval for the 9 school districts who still need to get board approval on this.
Okay, so those were for the 134
Correct.
approved by local board. Okay.
I will make a motion to waive Arkansas Code Annotated 6/10/106A, the school start date for those districts
Pending local
whose
board
decision
approval.
is still pending local board approval
1 year.
for 1 year.
Yes.
There's a motion by Mr. Wood, is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Henderson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Thank
motion
you.
passes. Thank you all. Was there any public comments? Anyone here for public comment? Okay. Okay, with that, I will take a point of privilege. We have a lot of school districts that are working very hard, and we know that you are doing the best for your students. I wish you all the best as you do create calendars. I also know that we all want to support you in that, support you in making research-based, evidence-based decisions where you can get your kids in front of high-quality instruction. Any other closing comments? We don't often have 150 districts on Zoom, so take advantage of it while we can. Anything else? Well, with that, we will close our meeting. Thank you all. Thank everyone for joining today. Because they all want to have a week-long Thanksgiving, which I like.
Well, and more of them are going into fall